After the French Revolution, the faith of France was devastated. Consequently, many religious societies of a missionary character arose to respond to the lack of catechesis, and most importantly, the lack of grace among the people of France. One such community was the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, founded by Father Eugene de Mazenod, who worked at the same time as the Missionaries of France, founded by Father Jean-Baptiste Rozon. The Oblates' special missionary work was for the poor. Let us now look at the life of their holy founder. Charles Joseph Eugene de Mazenod was born in Ai province on August 1st, 1782. While an infant, any time he cried, one simply had to take him to the church, and he stopped instantly. The strong will he portrayed as a bishop later was clearly evident in his childhood. He never cried when he wanted something, but said very simply, "I will have it." In his studies, he was trained by the Barnabites, and he made his first Holy Communion on Holy Thursday of 1792 at 10 years of age. While still this age at the school, he had to endure a very painful eye surgery, the performance of which he arranged for a day prior to his mother's visit, so as to bring her relief to know, when seeing him, that the surgery was already over. Eugene at first fled the doctor's room when seeing the sharp instruments, but after a prayer to the Holy Ghost for the gift of fortitude, he returned and endured the painful treatment without shedding one tear. And yes, his mother was most touched to learn on arriving that his surgery was already performed, with the intention of keeping her from anxiety over his pain. Eugene had to flee from France to Italy during the Revolution with his family, which was an interruption to his studies. His parents separated so as to recover seized property. Eugene was taken in by a family, one son of which was a priest, a great influence on this boy. During the years at this house, from 13 years of age to 16, Eugene spent much time in study from the library of this family. He developed a love for penance, sleeping on the bare ground and fasting often. He prayed the little office of the Blessed Virgin, served Mass daily, confessed weekly, and received Holy Communion on Sundays and feast days. Eventually, the de Mazenods returned to France, where Eugene's father soon died. Much wealth was left to him, but he spent much in helping the poor. As a young man, Eugene fell into a life of pleasure-seeking. He had a conversion from his waywardness on Good Friday, 1807. He said, quote, "Can I forget the bitter tears that the sight of the cross brought streaming from my eyes one Good Friday? Indeed, they welled up from my heart. There was no checking them. They were too abundant for me to be able to hide them from those who, like myself, were assisting at that moving ceremony. I was in a state of mortal sin, and it was precisely this that gave me grief. Blessed, 1,000 times blessed, that he, this good Father, notwithstanding my unworthiness, lavished on me all the richness of his mercy." Eugene heard the call to the priesthood and started seminary next year at St. Sulpice. He was ordained in 1811 at Amiens. He then served for a semester as formator at St. Sulpice, since Napoleon exiled the Sulpician priests from their seminary. After this work, Eugene helped Pope Pius VII in his sufferings at the hands of Napoleon, witnessing up front the cruelty of mankind to Christ and his bride, the Church. On returning to Ai, France, he asked not to be assigned to a parish, so as to rebuild the faith among the neglected. He was sick for a time from assisting plague-stricken prisoners from Austria, who arrived after war at Ai, during which time the people of Ai were most stricken that Eugene's life was in such great danger. Eugene recovered and began attracting young men to himself by his great preaching. It was from these young men that Eugene formed into a society. Many vocations came, including some for his own future missionary community. In 1816, Eugene started the Missionaries of Provence with the intention of evangelizing the most abandoned. His first location was an old Carmelite convent. De Mazenod structured the Oblate's life and formation on that of St. Sulpice. In 1818, he started another group of missionaries at Notre Dame de la, and was approved in 1826 by Pope Leo XII as a religious community with the vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and perseverance. The name of the community was the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. Their motto was, "He has sent me to evangelize the poor." Pope Leo expressed his pleasure over the privilege to approve a religious community in honor of Our Lady's Immaculate Conception, which dogma would soon, in a few decades, be solemnly defined. The Oblates were eventually invited to Canada in 1841, and they accepted the invitation. By this time, the community had 59 men in perpetual vows, which at this time, however, was considered a very small number of vocations in one community. However, the vocations multiplied by 7 in 20 years. Once the missionaries went to Canada. Many men were attracted to the society due to their work among the Indians in Canada. When Eugene was told by the novice master that vocations needed to be stopped as the community was growing too fast, Eugene replied, "I never want to say that is enough. This is a time of grace, and we must take advantage of it." Such a large number should not be surprising, as other seminaries and dioceses feared the loss of vocations to de Mazenod. The Oblates did not just foster vocations in their own group, but also for the secular priesthood, as they were assigned the task of directing the theological seminary of Marseille. When the door eventually opened for the missionaries to take up residence in England, a very Protestant area, Bishop de Mazenod received letters from them describing that hundreds of Protestants showed up for sermons and ceremonies, and being more and more drawn to the truth as expounded on by these missionaries, and seeing the beauty of the ancient rituals, began discussing the value of Catholicism. One of the Oblate missionaries said the following about a mission in Plattsburgh, Canada. "Never was there a more abundant harvest. Large sheaves were gathered in great numbers. Our threshing floor was a Protestant church, which the Universalists rented to us for $100 or 400 francs. In 2 weeks, the 3 hard-working Oblates heard nearly 1,600 confessions and distributed an equal number of communions to the Canadians who had been hungering for spiritual food. Nearly 40 marriages were blessed or validated, and the baptisms numbered at least 250. It was always before or after dinner that we baptized the children. More than once we left the table to baptize children who had been brought to us from a distance of more than 25 miles, which of course was not by car in those days. I myself baptized as many as 12 at one time." Unquote. The missionaries had to suffer much at times when establishing new houses. For instance, one priest of the order, Father Tellman, was given a seminary in Pittsburgh that had only 6 seminarians and 3 housemaids. Due to the indifference of the bishop at the local diocese, the place was so poor that Father Tellman avoided entering the kitchen for fear of losing his appetite, and he only had 1 set of tattered green vestments for Mass. The seminary moved locations, but the second place was no better than the first, so that Father had to go to the immigration center at times to be cleaned from dirt and lice. Unfortunately, he soon gave up and left without the permission of his superior. The missionaries took charge of shrines as well, and they became popular for their parish missions. They were also called upon by the Church to battle for souls against schismatic enemies. It is important to know that the Church has always had groups that distance themselves from the authority of the Church, but that God always provides the needed soldiers to fight for Him. And here follows one example in which the Oblates were called upon to be the soldiers to fight one such schism at a pilgrimage site at Notre Dame de Sion. 3 priests, brothers by blood, followed a certain neo-prophet named Vindrus, who claimed to have mystical experiences. They made a retreat during which a Carthusian told them that the time was come when the church would be regenerated in tribulation, the hour prophesied by their neo-prophet Vindrus. After Father Leopold, one of the priests, talked to Vindrus himself, also called the Oracle of the New Revelation, he began what he called the New Christian Society that would succeed Christianity, just as Christianity succeeded Judaism. The three priests, claiming that Vintras had the episcopacy, were seemingly consecrated bishops and named the Pontiff of Adoration, the Pontiff of Wisdom, and the Pontiff of Order. Leopold began to be called Divine Light, similar to the name Lucifer. These three priests, appearing at the missionaries' shrine at Notre Dame de Sion, began to spread their new messages. Being further suspended by the Bishop of Nancy, they took up residence in a private chapel with a following of 40 parishioners from Saxon, mostly women and girls. The priests, unable to pay their creditors, were eventually removed from their property, and the oblates received the building for a parish, and had the task of eradicating much error from the hearts of the people. As for the three priests, 2 died repentant and 1 did not. At these times, when even lukewarm Catholics knew what was expected to make a worthy and fruitful communion, it was not uncommon to gauge the fruit of a mission based on how many communions were made, and how many of these communions were made by the men. In other words, people stayed away from Holy Communion when they realized they lacked a desire to amend their lives and root out sin and imperfection, whereas they went to communion only if they were ready to allow the graces thereof to help them grow in virtue. It was carefully noted after each mission how many communions were made. Some missions appeared so hopeless that no one had to see the general communion to gauge the success of the mission, such as one that barely got the attention of the adults through handing holy images and medals to the children. Before Eugene became Bishop of Marseille, but had already been nominated for the episcopacy, the Holy Father Jean-Baptiste Rozon wrote him to ask permission to preach missions in Marseille in the future. De Mazenod replied that he would be delighted to accept the work. Father Rozon even expressed interest in combining missionary efforts with de Mazenod, but divine providence had other plans. The two communities, to their own regret, had difficulty working together due to prevailing diocesan politics of the times, but they respected each other's virtue and good works for the Church. Eugene wrote the following to Father Rozon: "All of us, you and we, worked for the glory of God. May God be glorified. That is all I want. It matters little whether it is through our ministry or yours. For myself, I shall always rejoice over all the good you accomplish and all the blessings that come to you. I go where I am sent and take the place assigned to me. It is for the bishop, who represents the father of the family, to determine what work is to be done and the portion of the vineyard where a given worker will do the most good and do it with more or less usefulness. Come what may, I shall always be devoted to you and shall always attach the greatest value to the friendship you have kindly shown me." Close quote. When Eugene became bishop, the aged Father Rozon did not delay in visiting him to offer his deepest congratulations, saying repeatedly, "How good you are." After Father Eugene assisted his uncle Fortuné, the Bishop of Marseille, for 10 years as Vicar General of the diocese, he was called to Rome and made Bishop of Icosium in 1832. Actually, Pope Gregory XVI appointed Eugene the successor to his uncle long before a new bishop was needed, so as to ensure that Marseille would have a holy bishop to help rebuild the faith in France after the Revolution. In 1837, Eugene became Bishop of Marseille and had the privilege of consecrating one of the priests of his own order, Father Taché, to the episcopacy for the Diocese of St. Boniface in Manitoba, Canada. As bishop, Eugene introduced St. Alphonsus' moral theology into France and caused the first French biography of the saint to be written by one of his oblates. He suffered a lack of priests after the Revolution, so that he had to bring in many foreigners. He was unable to open enough parishes for the people. It was de Mazenod who was responsible for the construction of the Cathedral of Marseille and the Basilica of Notre Dame de la Garde. De Mazenod struggled to keep good professors in his seminary, so that many of his seminarians were self-taught. He taught moral theology himself and made sure to address modern issues, such as Gallicanism, a thought that gave too much authority to the French state at the expense of the authority of the Church. He fought luxurious living among his priests in rural areas and encouraged all priests to pursue an academic training. He made the common life mandatory in rectories. He was very direct in answering difficult questions about religion that demanded answers uncomfortable to his inquirers. He had a great devotion to St. Charles Borromeo, the great reformer at the Council of Trent, and almost named his community in honor of the saint, who was already his own baptismal patron. He saw St. Charles as his episcopal model to imitate. He encouraged the founding of the Congregation of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in Marseille by Father Joseph-Marie Timon-David. Eugene preserved a preference for the old monarchy, overturned by the Revolution, but realized that he had to work with the governmental structure the present circumstances had provided. Still, anyone favorable towards the Revolution and its effects had a deep hatred for this bishop. In 1851, Eugene was given the title of archbishop. He went to Rome 3 years later for the declaration of the Immaculate Conception in 1854. His community had 416 men at his death in 10 countries. When sick and dying, the bishop was said to utter no word of complaint or sigh of pain, but said instead, "When one is on the cross, one must remain there. It means grace." While dying, he told a priest with tears, "After such a long episcopate, the way to heaven will be long. I hope my children and my friends come to my assistance." He told others around him that if he is sleeping when his illness worsens, he wanted to be woken so that he could die conscious and able to accept death as the will of God. He died saying, "Practice well among yourselves charity, 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 and outside zeal for the salvation of souls." Eugene had a quick temper and was known for letting it loose, and later making amends for it so well that he was considered difficult to approach but a charming man. As he aged, he conquered this vice with the virtue of meekness. Even when he was still learning to conquer his coldness and anger, he always expressed the deepest love and affection for all, and it took some time for him to conquer his excessive desire to be loved and thanked in return. His mortification of will may be seen in his letter to Father Tempier on being asked to accept the coadjutorship of Marseille. In this letter, he expressed that many saw him as industrious, but that in fact he was naturally drawn to solitude and inaction, so that his robust activity was purely from a sense of duty. In fact, he had a difficult time making decisions of important matters, especially the choice of a vocation and the establishment of his religious community. His mortification of body only increased as he aged, so that having built up intense habits of fasting and abstinence, he stubbornly refused even to unfold his napkin at events at which he was served meat on his days of abstinence. When old, he said, "My 80 years might dispense me from fasting, but they do not dispense me from doing penance for my sins." His poverty in private life was as that of a religious, so that a priest humorously remarked that it would be easy to mistake the bishop for a poor country pastor in purple. In public, however, Eugene conformed to the common expectations the Church had of the outward presentation of a bishop at civil and liturgical ceremonies. Eugene was known to say, when scolded for his simple way of life, "I am a bishop, but I have also taken the vow of poverty." This poverty made the bishop compassionate towards those who were poor by no desire of their own. The sisters of the poor knew where to go when they needed monetary assistance. On approaching the bishop for money on one occasion, he responded, in reference to their mother superior, "She has a good guardian angel, this mother of yours, but she also has some problems." He even removed his shoes in the middle of the street during winter to give them to someone in need. This would not have surprised Eugene's relatives, who saw him giving alms when only 6 years old. Dame Mazenod's religious discipline induced him on one occasion to correct a priest of his community for dressing as a man in the world, as the Anglicans did when outside his religious house in England. Eugene then emphasized that religious should not want to be religious only indoors, and then pointed to the example of the Passionists, who are not afraid to show people who they really are by wearing their habit all the time, which was their key to attracting vocations. This same priest was rebuked by our saint for acquiring property without permission. The prayer life of our saintly bishop was known to be obvious when he devoutly offered Mass. He kept a strict prayer schedule, as he did when a religious among his brethren. One of his favorite forms of prayer was adoration of the Blessed Sacrament before the sacred host exposed in the monstrance. One Holy Thursday, the priests of the diocese had planned to make the traditional vigil in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and on hearing that Eugene was delivering an early Good Friday sermon the next morning, decided to cancel their vigil. The bishop, on hearing this, announced that he would be presiding over the Holy Thursday vigil himself. He did not let them depart until after 11 p.m. and remained in the church himself all night. The Oblates of Mary Immaculate still exist today and are in about 70 countries. They are doing good work for the poor, and in many places still wear the cassock and the missionary crucifix. In conclusion, the proper mission of any Catholic in the world is perfectly expressed in the main mission of the Oblates, by the words of their founder, to make people fully humans, then Christians, and finally saints. Saint Eugene de Mazenod, pray for us.